Today we're going to be talking about giants. Um, I think giants are very fascinating considering that they are one of the few things that actually come up in a lot of stories and religions. There's only a handful of things that come up in a lot of them throughout all of history, throughout all of cultures. The Native Americans, the English, the Asians, Africans, all of them have stories of giants. Um, they range anywhere from the Indians talking about giants being giant cannibals, or in some cases, just being another tribe of very tall, very kind of hairy people. And you have stories all the way up until the 20th century where a group of Green Berets actually had an encounter with giants in Afghanistan. I think it's very interesting that these stories keep coming up, and there is possibility that these have a real reason. Some of the earliest writing of giants is actually predates the birth of Jesus. In the Greeks actually said that giants were born of Gaia when Uranus was castrated and his blood fell upon her. Now, of course, for Greeks, Gaia is another word for the earth. And Uranus was basically the sky. And it just simply, originally, we're just saying that they were very tall people. They were very strong. They always wore their armor. It was almost like their armor was a part of them, is what they say. Of course, later on, eventually, it got to the point where they were, uh, and they had like snakes for lower halves and all this other stuff. But I do think it's interesting that even back then, the Greeks, some of the earliest actual storytelling, said that there were giants on this earth. Go forward a little bit, and you have Christianity. Genesis 6:4, and it states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. Also, afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, who bore children to them." Essentially saying that uh, that the sons of God. Now, of course, there is debate on what that means. It's kind of odd that it would say that the sons of God and the daughters of man, considering that we're all sons and daughters of God in Christianity. So, what does it mean? Well, in kind of, not necessarily fan fiction, but in the book of Enoch, it is actually stated that the sons of God that is being spoken about are fallen angels. They came down to earth, and they are the ones who bore children with these daughters of man and created the Nephilim, which were giants. It's actually one of the reasons why God um, performed the flooding of the earth, was in the hopes of killing all of these Nephilim. Now, of course, it's interesting to kind of think of it that way. Now, of course, in Christianity, they do not use the writings of Enoch. But I do think the Book of Enoch is an interesting kind of way to think about it. What if angels, the fallen angels, the ones that eventually went with Lucifer, were the ones that came down, fell in love with these daughters of man, and decided to have children with these daughters of man, and created a race of giants? It kind of makes you wonder if we're going about this in a non-religious way. We have to think about a being coming from the skies who are the sons of God, meaning that they basically came down from the heavens, and they then bred with women to create a race of giants. So you kind of get what I'm going at, is could this potentially be either a story of different human beings, maybe a different group of people coming in that were taller, who would take women and have children with these women, and the children of those women would be really tall? Or could it be aliens? Could it be a bunch of different things? Giants also come up in a lot of Native American and a lot of um, Central American, throughout Mexico and all of that, of giants as well. So, if we're going based off timelines, one of the timelines I'd really like to talk about is Lovelock Cave. Lovelock Cave is a cave in America that has a interesting story about it. One day, while people were digging out this cave, trying to get back Quano, they came across Indian artifacts. And actually, one of the artifacts they came across was a skeleton. A skeleton that was 6 feet 6 inches. Granted, that's not necessarily a giant, but considering that 6 foot 6 inches today is incredibly tall. 6 foot 6 inches is well above average for most people in the world. Time of the Native Americans, before the white settlers had taken over most of this land, back then people were much shorter. You got to think the average height back then was quite a few inches shorter than it is today. Today, I believe it's about 5'10" to 5'11". Back then, it was about 5'5" to 5'6", quite a bit shorter. So, imagine these giants back then. Now, like with this cave, there is actually a interesting story from the Native Americans that happened to be around there. They talk about a group of cannibalistic giants that warred with their tribe. And ultimately, the final battle happened to be inside of this cave, where they drug brush in front of the cave and set the brush on fire and killed all of the other Native Americans or other tribe that were inside of this cave, and then they wiped them out. But according to them, they were very agile, very strong, powerful, and they were much, much taller than everyone else. Now, of course, in some kind of way, it is believed that essentially this is a story to kind of justify them killing another tribe due to kind of just resources. There's no way to tell. None of us were there during that time. We just have the stories to go off of. But this is another story of giants who are much better at war than we are, who are more athletic than average people, and much taller than average people. The next place that we go to is throughout Central America, Mexico, all of this. The Spanish conquistadors actually wrote about certain stories dealing with the giants that they came across while exploring. It is said that the pyramids of Mexico were actually built by a giant who came up from the earth and teach the people of Mexico how to build these pyramids and how to build all of these monuments and things of that nature. That this giant was far more advanced than they were. It is also written about by Mexican conquistador probably gonna get this wrong, but Fernando de Sata. He wrote about meeting one of these giants named Black Panther, and that Black Panther was considerably taller than him and all of his men. All of his men, including himself, only came up to Black Panther's chest, head. So he wrote about the fact that him and his soldiers only came up to about Black Panther's chest. So he was a couple of feet taller than they were. Of course, back then, Spanish conquistadors were not necessarily the tallest, but that's still fairly tall for a person to be that much taller. We're talking 6 foot in the high 6 feet. But that was Black Panther. Whenever they met Black Panther's father, the chief of their tribe, he actually was as tall to Black Panther as Black Panther was to the conquistadors. Meaning that this chief was 7 feet tall, maybe a bit taller than that. So it kind of makes you wonder in these kind of sayings, are we talking about giants in the same way? Yes, most people when we think about giants, we're thinking about 20 feet tall. They are almost skyscraper in height. But we can't lose our imagination on it. What if a lot of these giants people are talking about are a different race of human beings, but not 20 feet tall on average, but closer to 7 to 8 feet tall in average? Whenever I think of giants, I initially go to think of giants. I think of my childhood. Learning about a man known as Andre the Giant. Andre was 7 feet 1 inches tall. It's a fairly big man. And compared to most people that he was wrestling at that time, other people who were 6'6", 6'5", giant people, he towered above them. And he wasn't even the tallest man that we know of. So I think it's interesting to talk about maybe giants aren't 20 feet tall and larger than anything explainable. Maybe giants are a group of humans who happen to be closer to that 7 to 8 to 9 feet tall, not the 20 feet. 20 feet is honestly just way too big. When you think about resources for the time, when you think about just the natural order of things, 20 feet tall is a bit too tall for a human being. But I do think that we are talking about something other than human. Something that I came across a lot while researching this is stories of giants and Native Americans have a lot of similarities to their stories of Bigfoot. Yes, Bigfoot, the giant hairy thing that lives out in the woods, that at one point in time in most stories was a separate tribe that the Native Americans talked about, but we have essentially made a mascot for preserving nature. But there are stories from Native Americans talking about another group, a different tribe that were considerably taller. They were considerably hairy, but still were able to speak, still acted like humans, still seek shelter. So it kind of makes you wonder if these two stories from the Native Americans are so close to each other in examples, what if they're talking about the exact same being? A being that is a bit hairier, a being that is taller, stronger. All of these stories are the exact same story. A story of a different group of people who are considerably taller than the rest of us, who might be a bit hairier than the rest of us. What happened to these people? Where did they come from? I think it's very interesting that giants come up in a lot of different things. In fact, one of the coolest things I have come across is during my latest vacation, we went to Disney World. And in Disney World, there is a ride that takes you through the evolution of man. And during the very beginning of it is man during the Ice Age, hunting woolly mammoths and all of these things. In that ride, if you pay attention, they put a giant in there. There are a group of cavemen, essentially, who are trying to fight a woolly mammoth, and then off to the side of them is another man helping them. But he is the size of the woolly mammoth. So you have to think, is this just a different off branch of human? Is this, we went one way and we're now the way we are, not as hairy for some of us, a bit shorter, and that they went a different way where they are taller, hairier? It makes you wonder. Another thing is, in 2002, in Afghanistan, there's a story of a group of Green Berets coming across and getting into an encounter with a 12th. Is that the hair isn't brown, as a lot of us would kind of know modern day. For them, the stories, a lot of these stories, were red-haired. These people had red hair. So it makes you wonder, are all of these the exact same thing? A being that is taller, red-haired, kind of look like humans, but not exactly like humans? There's a lot of theories that go into giants. If you ever consider looking up conspiracy theories, there are so many that you could honestly look at them all day and all night and probably spend your entire life on, and you would never be able to read all of them. But giants are an interesting one, considering that even religions have stories of giants in them. These from Christianity that talk about giants. And Christianity is kind of one of the more modern religions, mainstream religions, that is. And I do think it's interesting that they talk about giants and that giants were real. They actually talk about David and Goliath. And Goliath was about 9 feet, a little bit taller than that. But if you look it up, when you're talking about the tallest man in human history, you're talking about Robert Waddell. You're talking about You're talking about Robert Wadlow. Robert was 8 feet 11 inches at his tallest. That is a very tall person. And in the story of David versus Goliath, Goliath, based off what we can kind of assume these measurements are, Goliath was about 9 feet 9 inches, meaning that he was only about 10 inches taller than Robert. And that leads into some debate. Is the story of giants just people that had this kind of gigantism where they were just naturally super tall compared to everyone else? You have to wonder. Considering that Goliath is, or in the story, is considered a great warrior, it makes you wonder. Because if anyone knows the story of Robert, or for that matter, Andre the Giant, these men were in constant pain. They were incredibly too tall for their body. They're, for the most part, their organs all were bad. Their bones constantly ached. Every joint they had. These men grew and kept growing, and they did not live a very comfortable lifestyle. Honestly, Andre the Giant, yes, he wrestled and he did some really incredible things, but if you listen to stories about him near the end of his life, only for a short time was he at his peak. Most of his career, actually, he couldn't perform at a super high level. It's why if you go back and watch wrestling matches with him, he doesn't do a whole lot. It's because of how much it hurt him to move, to lift, to do anything. And for Robert, it was a lot of the same way. He couldn't hardly get around. He actually had to use a cane to walk because his knees were bad, his joints were bad. So if Goliath was this massive giant that was feared by all because he was such an incredible warrior, was there something different about him than Robert? Was there something that he didn't feel these pains and therefore he could be an amazing soldier? It's hard to tell, honestly. For all we know, Goliath could have just been a really tall person back in those days. And the stories about him being a great warrior were made up. He was used more as a symbol of their power and a story. They would spread stories about how powerful he was and how much stronger he was than everyone. And therefore, whenever people would see this giant coming, because of course during that time you wouldn't believe that there was a man that tall. You would see him coming and you would have to believe that all the other stories are real. There's no real way to tell, considering that none of us were around back then. But I do believe that I have a theory on all of this. Not sure if this theory is correct. There's no real way to tell. For all we know, all of these accounts of giants are simply people growing really tall, and that phenomenon has been happening our entire species. Some people just grow to massive proportions. But what if in Genesis, by it talking about the sons of God coming down and visiting the daughters of man, who then birthed children, what if we're talking about aliens? Yes, that sounds crazy, but think about it. Carbon. Think about it. The things that make our world and us as a species the way it is nothing special in the universe. And it has come out that there are aliens out there. There are UFOs. We have not yet to make contact with these beings, but we know they are there. What if there are a species of aliens from another world, much like ours, who kind of went down the same evolutionary path that we did, but maybe didn't have the hardships that we have had, causing us to be a bit on the shorter side? What if their species were able to grow? What if everything on their planet is bigger, taller? Therefore, they are bigger and taller And what if these species, what if these groups of aliens decided to come to Earth, met some of the daughters of man, and abducted them? And much in the way that human scientists would do, run some experiments. Some of the things that they would probably try eventually is there a way for us and this species to have children? And what if they were? What if these women that were taken by these other beings were able to give birth to children? Children which grew very fast, very tall, bigger, stronger than the average human. And what if they did that everywhere? That would explain why in Mexico that these giants that came up from the earth were more advanced than a lot of us. They are the ones that taught the Aztecs how to build the pyramids and how to build all these structures. That would explain why in a lot of these stories these giants are more agile than we are, more athletic than we are, and in some of these stories capable of feats that we cannot perform. So the next time that you are thinking about what could be out there, I want you to think about, is the reason why some of us are considerably taller than everyone else, is the reason why there are giants among us. Could it be because aliens decided to come down, pick up a couple of chicks, have some fun time, and have some kids? And that is where a thought comes up. What if not all of these aliens were men? What if some of the aliens came down and were women? Massive women, very large. I might be just speaking for myself, but I am fairly certain that there is a large group of the population that, if given the chance to have children with a giant woman, they'd take it. But in conclusion, I think giants are a super interesting subject. I think that they could be the most interesting subject of our generation, considering that they are one of the few things that link a lot of cultures together. And it's one of the things that we have to consistently think about is, were there a group of people that were considerably taller than the rest of us, that were massive in size and scale? Did we wipe them out? Or are they simply in hiding, like the giants in the caves in Afghanistan? If there are giants that do live in caves, there are a massive amounts. There is a massive amount of giants there is a massive amount of cave systems in the United States. So what if these giants that the Native Americans talked about were not wiped out, but instead went into hiding and are now living in our cave systems? You have to think about it. Please comment. Let me know what you think. Maybe I'm just talking out of my ass. Maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about. I think giants are an extremely interesting subject. I think that stories about giants are really fascinating, and I hope you do too. If you agree with me, let me know in the comments. I would love to talk about this theory more with people. Try talking to it about my I've tried talking about it with my wife, but she tells me to shut the fuck up and just make the video. But if more people want to talk about it, great. Maybe you have information I don't. But I'd love to know what you think. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this. And if you wouldn't mind subscribing, turning on the notifications, it'd be greatly appreciated. In the future, I hope to do more of these videos. It'll be determined on how this video does. But I hope that everyone has a wonderful day, a wonderful night, and a wonderful year. Be kind to others and treat everyone with a bit of respect. Thank you.